Welcome to the Deep Dive.
Great to be here.
Today, we're really getting into, this is our final exploration of the course material. We're looking at, well, the huge intersection of criminology with globalization and postmodernism.
Yeah, it's a big one. This is where things get really complex and maybe a bit unsettling.
Exactly. It's not just about ticking off the last topic. It's more a chance to reflect, isn't it, on the whole course, on, the confusing nature of our world today.
And how these massive global shifts are fundamentally changing how we even think about crime, justice, order, all of it.
It's where those traditional ideas, the neat lines criminology used to draw, they just blur.
They really do. How do you take theories built for, say, a single nation state and apply them to problems that just ignore borders? Problems that challenge our basic ideas about, well, progress.
It's a huge question. Now, before we dive deeper, we need to be clear about where this discussion comes from. It's all drawn from the course materials, specifically the excerpts for Topic 10 Conclusion, Criminology under Globalization.
And we really must thank the University of London. They made these documents available for students, and honestly, it's an incredible resource for getting to grips with these ideas.
Absolutely. A huge thanks to them. And just so everyone's clear, like all our deep dives based on course readings, this is purely for educational purposes only.
That's right, educational purposes. And we're also really pleased to say this deep dive is brought to you by Sinorbit Academy, Sri Lanka.
And one more thing before we start, to all of you listening who are gearing up for exams.
Yeah.
Seriously, good luck.
Yeah, best of luck. You've done the reading, you've put in the time. Trust yourselves.
You've got this. Okay, so let's map out this final journey. The key texts guiding us here are, well, they're essential. Hopkins Burke, chapters 19, 21, and 22. Then there's Franco on globalization and crime, chapter 2 specifically.
And Morson's Criminology, Civilization, and the New World Order, chapter 3. Think of them as different perspectives, different angles on this really complex picture.
And the source material kicks off with this fascinating quote from Borges, from his story, The LF. He talks about this point in space, the LF, where you can see everything in the universe all at once from every angle.
Simultaneously, without any distortion. But then he says the impossible part, the real challenge, is trying to put that infinite simultaneous vision into words, into language, which is always sequential, one thing after another.
It's such a powerful metaphor for what we're facing here, isn't it? That feeling of being overwhelmed by the sheer scale and complexity of our interconnected world.
Absolutely. How do you capture it all? How do you even begin to describe it using, well, language or even the tools of a single discipline like criminology? It feels almost impossible sometimes.
And it really connects back to things we've touched on throughout the course. Remember the course guide starting with that really stark quote about the Holocaust?
Yes, urging us to look beyond the everyday, the mundane.
It challenged us from day one, didn't it? To ask those big questions. What is crime? What's criminology really for? We even look at that Cortázar story.
Right, the one that made us question what's real and what's magical realism, blurring those lines.
So traditionally, and the source makes this point very clearly, criminology often worked with a kind of hidden assumption.
And an underlying belief.
Yeah, that there was a pretty clear line between normal, good, ordered, civilized, and deviant, bad, chaotic criminal.
And the job of criminology was basically to figure out the deviant side and, well, fix it, control it, manage it, build that secure, civilized world.
Exactly. But this final section, drawing on all these readings, it basically says that certainty, that neat division, that belief in a secure, knowable world, it's gone. It's been lost.
The foundations have shifted massively. It's like Borges has left just too much, too complex, too contradictory for the old tools.
So the aim here, and for our deep dive today, isn't to give you neat answers or wrap everything up. It's more about exploring the limits of criminology.
Its limitations when it faces these huge global realities.
Right. But also, crucially, why we still need it. The source talks about needing a broader criminological imagination, something more flexible, more critical.
And it stresses this isn't the final word, it's a pause, a snapshot of thinking that's constantly evolving.
Okay, so picking up on that idea of limitation, of adaptation, the Hopkins Burke chapters mentioned, they really show how the field is being pulled in different ways, facing different challenges.
Yeah, the source says if criminology ever thought of itself as a science with clear-cut answers like physics or something, well, now it's described as deconstructed and scattered.
Deconstructed and scattered. That sounds messy. What does that actually mean for someone studying criminology?
It means the old reference points, the things you thought were solid ground, what counts as crime, the role of the state. Individual versus social causes, they're all being questioned, undercut. The boundaries are just dissolving.
So things that weren't considered criminology before are now part of the picture.
Exactly. Completely new topics are emerging. Things previously seen as maybe, I don't know, political science or history or economics, now they demand a criminological perspective. The criminological days, as the source calls it, is widening incredibly.
Can you give some examples from the source? What kind of new topics were appearing?
Sure, the source mentions specific books that really illustrate this shift, like Criminology and War, Transgressing the Borders by Walklate and McGarry in 2015, or another one, Invisible Crimes and Social Harms, edited by Davies, Francis, and Wyatt in 2014.
Just the titles tell a story, don't they? War, invisible harms.
Right, things way outside the old box, the study of war, harms that aren't even technically illegal sometimes. These are now squarely in the conversation. It seems like almost nothing is off limits anymore if you adopt this broader, more imaginative view.
So the field is cracking open, and the source uses two big concepts to frame all this unsettling change: globalism and postmodernism. We need to unpack those. Let's think about traditional criminology first. Maybe Gottfredson and Hershey's big theory from 1990, a general theory of crime.
Yes, Gottfredson and Hershey, their focus was very much on crime as, well, fairly mundane acts committed by people who lacked self-control. Low self-control was the key.
Right. Gottfredson and Hershey, low self-control. A general theory trying to explain it all.
But then the source immediately throws something huge and horrifying against that idea: genocide. State-sponsored killing.
Yeah. Millions killed by states.
Yeah.
Directly or through deliberate neglect. Mao's Great Leap Forward, Cambodia, Rwanda. How does low self-control even begin to explain that kind of calculated, state-run mass murder?
It just can't. It's completely inadequate. It shows you can't just focus on individual failings when you're talking about state atrocities on that scale.
Yeah.
And the source uses Adolf Eichmann as a really chilling counterexample.
Eichmann, the Nazi official involved in organizing the Holocaust logistics.
Exactly. He wasn't some petty thief who couldn't control his impulses. Quite the opposite. The source describes him as having great personal drive and self-control, methodical, bureaucratic, efficient in organizing mass murder.
That's crucial. Eichmann, great personal drive and self-control, involved in genocide. It just destroys the idea that low self-control is the universal answer, especially for the worst harms.
Utterly. We have to look elsewhere. And this is where postmodernism comes in, as the source explains it. Drawing on thinkers like Lyotard, it's defined here as this collapse of belief in the big stories, the grand narratives of progress.
The idea that history is automatically moving towards something better, more rational, more civilized.
Exactly. That belief is shattered. Postmodernism, in this context, is very much a post-Auschwitz way of thinking, coming to terms with what history, especially 20th century history, actually showed us.
Post-Auschwitz. That phrase is so loaded. So the Holocaust isn't just a historical event, it's a lens for understanding now.
Absolutely. It destroys any simple faith in inevitable progress. And globalization, in the way the source uses it here, is about confronting that full, brutal knowledge of history. Colonialism, imperialism, and yes, centrally, the Holocaust.
We need to hold on to those. Globalization, colonialism, imperialism, the Holocaust, they're not just background noise.
Not at all. They shape our globalized present. And the source makes a really difficult, unsettling point about Nazism itself. It suggests seeing it not just as chaos, but as, paradoxically, an expression of bureaucratic objectivity, part of the secular rational drive to categorize and manage populations.
Wow. Bureaucratic objectivity.
Yes, and here's the really challenging insight the source pulls out. If we analyze the Holocaust using the standard social science tools of the time, it starts to look like an expression of legality and the actual ethos of criminology back then.
Hold on. The Holocaust linked to legality, to criminology's own mindset. How?
The argument is that it wasn't outside the system, it wasn't beyond law or time, it was, and this is a quote highlighted from David Fraser's work, Law After Auschwitz, it was overdetermined by law.
Overdetermined by law.
Meaning existing legal frameworks, administrative structures, the problem-solving mentality. Here's a social problem, let's find a rational solution. These things were twisted and used to facilitate the horror. The Jewish question framed as a problem needing a state solution.
That's deeply disturbing. It suggests the roots were partly within normal society, not just outside it. We must remember that connection. Holocaust, legality, criminology's ethos, overdetermined by law, Fraser, law after Auschwitz.
It forces a real reckoning with the potential dark side of purely rational administrative approaches. And the source mentions Rubinstein's book After Auschwitz from 1966.
What did Rubinstein argue?
He argued the Holocaust revealed a cold, uncaring universe. Modern science shows nature itself lacks morality, right? But Rubinstein said history reveals these terrifyingly anti-human capacities within societies where mass extermination becomes a possible strategy for, in his chilling words, human waste disposal.
Human waste disposal. Horrifying. Let's repeat
Yeah.
that. Rubinstein, After Auschwitz, cold, unfeeling cosmos, anti-human capacities, extermination as a waste disposal.
Yeah. The Nazis unleashed total state power, breaking old limits. So the source argues this should have destroyed traditional criminology.
Why? Because traditional criminology saw crime as the problem and the state as the, well, good guy solving it.
Precisely. The Holocaust showed the state itself could be the ultimate criminal, using bureaucracy and law itself to commit unimaginable harm. But it didn't destroy criminology. This huge event, the Holocaust, was barely mentioned in mainstream criminology texts for decades.
Why not?
The source speculates maybe it was a dialectical realization, maybe too challenging, too close to the discipline's own assumptions about rationality and state power. It took a long time for the field to even start grappling with it.
And that grappling is still ongoing, especially as, tragically, genocide hasn't stopped. The source moves right into the reality of continuing genocide today.
Yes, highlighting how vital this is for contemporary criminology. It points to key readings, Fairstein's 2014 book, Genocide as Social Practice, and those really important reports by Green, McManus, and Venning on Myanmar and the Rohingya from 2015 and 2018.
Let's flag those. Firestein, Green et al., Myanmar Rohingya. These give us a contemporary case study.
Firestein's concept is central here. Genocide as a social practice. Remember that phrase? Firestein, genocide as social practice. It's not just random violence, it's systematic. It involves deliberate construction of us and them, the destruction of the targeted group, and then the reorganization of society afterwards.
Construction, destruction, reorganization, a chillingly methodical process.
And Firestein makes this crucial point, highlighted in the source. The legal framework itself often enables the continuation of genocide. The laws, or the lack of them, the denial of legal status, these things facilitate the process. Think about Myanmar arguing the Rohingya aren't citizens, so human rights don't apply. That's law being weaponized.
And the source uses the Rohingya in Myanmar as a devastating example of this process in action. Myanmar, Rohingya, we need to remember this case. The timeline is horrific. Starting way back in 1977, labeling them illegal Bengalis.
Denying their identity in their own land.
Decades of persecution, escalating massively, leading to 2017 when the UN mission was actually barred from investigating. And by late 2018, that terrible assessment from ISCI at Queen Mary University of London, genocide achieved, genocide continues.
It's a long, slow, deliberate process. Let's remember that timeline and the key players. Myanmar, Rohingya, 1977, 2017, 2018, ISCI, Queen Mary University of London.
The numbers are just staggering. The source cites Green et al. From 2018, over 800,000 Rohingya forced into Bangladesh since 2016 alone. Over 1 million living in those camps by late 2018.
Over 800,000 fled, over 1 million in camps in Bangladesh. These aren't just statistics, they're shattered lives.
So how? How is this allowed to happen? The source points to denial, refusing to use the word genocide, hiding behind terms like ethnic cleansing.
Right, that distinction. Ethnic cleansing versus genocide. Using ethnic cleansing avoids the legal obligations that the word genocide triggers under the convention. It's a political maneuver.
Tomás Ojea Quintana, the UN Special Rapporteur, tried to cut through this denial with a plea for empathy.
Yes, the source highlights his words, asking us to imagine being a young Rohingya woman. The constant fear, denial of existence, no health care, limited food, confined, facing rape, torture, death. He framed helping them not just as charity, but as a legal and moral obligation.
Let's remember his name in that powerful framing. Tomás Ojea Quintana, Rohingya woman example. Legal and moral obligation. It makes it real.
And those ISCI reports from 2015 and 2018 argue that preventing genocide needs more than just the Genocide Convention. It needs a broader human rights-based approach.
So ISCI, human rights-based approach, beyond genocide convention. The existing tools might not be enough.
And if we apply Firestein's framework as the source does, we see the systematic stages in the Rohingya case. First, stigmatization and dehumanization.
Destroying connections, creating us and them.
Exactly. Targeting them because they lack citizenship, stripping their identity, confining them, excluding them. The government even banned the name Rohingya in 2012.
Forcing people to erase their identity.
And the dehumanizing language the source mentions, a senior official calling them dark brown and ugly as ogres. Horrific. So remember, stigmatization, dehumanization, no citizenship nationality, banning name, dark brown and ugly as ogres.
Then comes harassment, testing the waters for violence.
Yes, and getting the wider population used to it. Constant surveillance back in 2015. Propaganda gaining support. And the devastating demographic shift. 1.2 million Rohingya in Rakhine in 2012, down to maybe 200,000 by October 2018.
A massive reduction. Harassment, state surveillance, propaganda, 1.2 million to 200,000.
Third, isolation, physically separating them. The source mentions 138,000 forced into camps back in 2012 after organized massacres in villages destroyed. This wasn't random. It was approved by police, military, local elite.
Concentrating them, controlling them. Isolation, 138,000 detention camps, organized massacres, village destruction, approved by police, military, elite.
Fourth, systematic weakening, making resistance impossible. The source points to cutting off all health care from February 2014. It's a kind of social death, stripping dignity agency.
Systematic weakening, healthcare deprivation, social death, stripped agency dignity, leaving them utterly vulnerable.
Leading, tragically, to annihilation. Mass killings, forced evictions, systematic rape as a weapon, burning villages. The source gives brutal specifics. August 2017, maybe 2,000 killed by the army, 750 buildings destroyed. The Queen Mary team found rape was purposefully directed by the state.
Purposefully directed, unimaginable.
90,000 fled in 2016. UN confirmed over 364 Muslim villages destroyed. By October 2018, over 800,000 had fled total. Remember these horrific details. Annihilation, mass killings, rape, burning villages, specific numbers, 2K, 750, 90K, 364, 800K, rape purposefully directed.
And the final stage in Firestein's model, symbolic enactment.
Yeah, this is about rewriting history, erasing the victims, rebuilding on their land, new military bases, new settlements. The source cites Firestein saying the aim is that not only do the victims no longer exist, but they allegedly never existed.
Erasing memory itself. Symbolic enactment, reshape land, new infrastructure allegedly never existed.
And the government denial is just blatant. Denying genocide while denying the Rohingya even exist. Claiming no oppression. The source quotes Senior General Min Aung Hlaing. There is no oppression or intimidation. A direct lie.
Government denial. Senior General Min Aung Hlaing, quote, "It's Orwellian."
Totally. The source calls it Orwellian-style distortion, claiming people fled freely while escaping bullets and rape, calling mass rape fake news, claiming Rohingya burned their own homes, denying burning bodies.
While survivors tell horrific stories, ISCI interviews mentioned accounts of the military throwing bodies into pits, some still alive.
Unspeakable. Remember that contrast. Orwellian distortion, fake news versus the reality. Military collected bodies, some not dead.
The ISCI conclusion is bleak. Rohingya voices unheard, their vitality gone, actively written out of history, and the big question remains, what hope is there if the Genocide Convention itself seems unable to stop it?
Rohingya voices unheard, written out of history, hope, Genocide Convention. It's a profound challenge.
Which brings us back to those Activity 10.1 questions for you to think about. Why are warnings ignored? What does the Rohingya case tell us about the effectiveness of the Genocide Convention's prevention aspects? Really tough questions.
Okay, moving from that direct state violence, another huge theme of globalization in the source is the economic side, the spread of the global free market. Stiglitz called it perverse fiscal discipline. Others see it liberating, but undeniably, it's global now.
And the source identifies the key drivers: the World Bank, the IMF, International Monetary Fund, and the WTO, World Trade Organization.
Those three are crucial architects: World Bank, IMF, WTO. And the system they promote is generally called the neoliberal world order.
Neoliberal world order. Got it. And how does postmodernism connect here?
Well, the source links it to that Enlightenment drive to understand and control everything through reason. Modern tech makes the world visible, knowable, but also reveals its contradictions, its diversity. It resists easy labels.
So we see more, but understand less neatly.
In a way, yes. So the globalized world is this mix. We discover the world's complexity, but at the same time, this powerful neoliberal ideology tries to impose a particular order on it. And the result is this deep interdependency. We're all linked economically.
But that knowing that integration isn't neutral, is it? The source mentions critique.
Definitely not neutral. The critique is that it's knowledge and integration through a specific lens, Western ideologies. David Harvey in 2005 called this a new imperialism, not military, but economic and cultural
So
dominance.
Western ideologies, new imperialism, Harvey. That's the counter-argument.
Right. So the summary is the world is undeniably neoliberal, modernist in its drive for control, and saturated with Western ideas about consumerism, self-worth, etc.
But it's not all smooth sailing. There are downsides, risks.
Huge risks. The source mentions Ulrich Beck's work on new global risks, things like climate change, financial collapse that cross borders, violent reactions against secular globalism extremism, and the costs of the economic model itself. Climate change is the big one, but also biological threats, pandemics spreading instantly. Bauman wrote back in '98 about the harsh human consequences, the way it creates winners and losers.
Let's tick those off. New risks, reactionary forces, climate change, pandemics, severe human consequences. Bauman, it's a double-edged sword.
Massively so. Progress and peril, hand in hand.
So the source boils down globalization and postmodernism into two ways they operate. First, as an empirical description, just saying how things are. Interconnected, risky, ideologically shaped.
And second, as a normative principle,
Right.
saying how we should live, how we ought to respond to this new reality, a call for a different way of being.
Let's look at the empirical side first, how things are. The source says state sovereignty is being undercut. The idea that the nation-state is fully in charge within its borders, that's weakening.
Yeah, state sovereignty undercut. The argument is the state just can't control everything anymore. Global money flows, information, even crime itself, its power to produce sovereignty is weaker.
So how do states react?
Often ambivalently. They might try to look strong through popularism, especially around security, declaring war on drugs, war on terror.
Ah, those phrases again, war on drugs, war on terror, symbolic power plays.
Often, yes. Ways to assert control visibly, even if the underlying problems are transnational. And it creates contradictions. One state's war causes problems elsewhere, which leads to a really stark argument. The state is becoming part of the crime problem, not just the solution.
Wow. State part of the crime problem. That's a fundamental shift.
It means we need to look beyond the state for answers, for ways to define harm and respond legitimately.
Okay, now the normative side. Globalization demanding how we should live.
This is about seeing humanity and the planet as a shared project, a praxis, our global living together, recognizing interconnectedness and shared fate. It demands rethinking everything, how we think, act, relate. It's an ethical call for a more globally just way of existing.
A call for global living together, globally just existence. But it's not a simple call, is it? There are tensions.
Huge tensions. You have the globalization of hope versus the globalization of crisis. But both sides agree the old nation-state structures are changing. The question is, will genuinely global rules emerge?
And the hopeful vision involves
A peaceful, just global order, maybe a global code of law based on universal human rights enforced by bodies like the International Criminal Court, the ICC.
human rights ICC. That's the dream.
But there's skepticism. The source mentions Duzinas questioning if it's really working, and the reality often looks like the opposite. Failed states, chaos, instability, difficulty even grasping what's happening. Trump's comments on banning Muslims are cited as an example of this chaotic response.
So, failed states, chaos, difficulty grasping reality, Trump quote. It's a contested space.
Definitely. Which leads us neatly into section 10.2, looking at the specific criminological features emerging from all this. Activity 10.2 points to the Franco reading chapter 2, Global Mobility and Human Traffic. It asks us to think about how increased mobility becomes criminogenic.
Okay, activity 10.2, Franco, global mobility and human traffic. What features does Franco highlight?
The first big one is border-crossing transnational crime.
Border-crossing transnational crime, what falls under that?
Basically, crimes that operate across borders, challenging state-based justice systems. Think trafficking and illegal migration drugs, but especially human trafficking. The source flags sex workers, illegal immigrants as targets.
And it made that comparison to slavery, calling them revived crimes. That sticks with you. Let's repeat. Trafficking, illegal migration, human trafficking compared to slavery, revived crimes.
Yes, the exploitation echoes historical forms. Franco also talks about new forms of organized crime. Same activities, drugs, trafficking, but focusing on the globalized structure of the criminal groups themselves. Their scale, use of tech, ability to evade nations.
New forms of organized crime. More sophisticated, more transnational.
And finance crimes are key. International fraud, money laundering, they thrive on global systems and weak regulation.
International fraud, money laundering, exploiting the global flow of money.
Terrorism is also listed, though the source questions if it's purely criminological. The war on terror framing blurred lines between crime, war, politics.
Terrorism, war on terror. A complex category forced into criminology's view.
Then there's security and risk, linked directly to mobility. More movement equals more perceived risk, leading to more security theater, surveillance.
Security and risk, a consequence of movement.
And underpinning so much of this, the rise of the internet, instant global communication, a tool for organized crime, trafficking, luring victims, fundamentally borderless.
Rise of the internet, a game changer for transnational crime.
The source suggests this cluster of crimes emerged organically, existing crimes going global, or old ones like slavery reappearing. It's linked to studying criminal organizations.
But the focus here isn't on Interpol or cross-border policing itself.
No, the syllabus focus, according to the source, is on the nature of these crimes and the challenge they pose to criminological thinking, though it does mention important gender-focused work.
On sex slavery, drug mules, often with a victim focus.
Exactly. Recognizing people caught in trafficking or illegal migration are often both lawbreakers and victims of severe exploitation.
So how is this being theorized? What's the commentary?
A major theme is the decline of the nation-state. That phrase again, boundaries porous, state control weakened.
Decline of the nation-state.
Sometimes called the end of the Westphalia era. Remember that. End of Westphalia era. If state sovereignty crumbles, the whole basis of international law founded on state agreements is shaky. This might shift focus to sub-state levels, regions, communities. Burke's radical moral communitarian criminology fits here.
Sub-state levels, radical moral communitarian criminology, looking below the state.
Potentially. And globalization is defined by these transnational flows. People, stuff, ideas ignoring borders. The source argues any criminology facing this must be post-colonial.
Transnational flows, post-colonial criminological imagination. Why post-colonial?
Because global inequalities, power dynamics, the routes of these flows, they're shaped by colonial history.
Yeah.
You can't understand global crime without that context, without challenging Western bias.
Okay, what's the second big feature arising from globalization?
Harms that are global by definition, or transnational harms.
Harms global by definition, transnational harms. Like what?
Environmental harms are the classic example. Toxic waste, pollution, deforestation, linked to corporate crime and often state collusion. Crimes of the state.
Environmental harms, corporate crime, state collusion. Why global?
Because the scale of harm now threatens the whole planet, potentially making human life impossible. Climate change needs global solutions. One nation can't fix it.
Environmental harm, human life impossible.
Right.
Remedies must be global. Existential threats.
And this spurs transnational activism, sometimes leading to things like eco-terrorism, which then becomes a new focus for criminology.
Crime and the internet fits here too.
Yes, because the internet is inherently global.
Right.
Identity theft, hacking, modern-day pirates operating across jurisdictions.
Crime and the internet. Identity theft, computer hacking, modern-day pirates, borderless crime.
And finally, the ultimate international crimes. War crimes, genocide, crimes against humanity, defined and judged, in theory, internationally.
War crimes, genocide, crimes against humanity. Our Rohingya discussion fits here.
Precisely. Which leads us to Activity 10.3 and the Morrison reading, Chapter 3 of Criminology, Civilization, and the New World Order.
Activity 10.3, Morrison. This involves some really challenging questions he poses, questions for you, the listener, to really grapple with.
They cut deep. First, why does Morrison link measuring crime, the stats, the data, to the power of the nation-state?
Measuring crime power of the nation-state. What does that imply about who gets counted?
Second, how did the Nazis misuse statistics?
Nazis misuse statistics. Chilling, given the earlier discussion.
Third, if the aim is to improve the average individual, does that imply eliminating the inferior?
Average individual, eliminate the inferior. Confronting eugenics.
Fourth, the toughest one. Did criminology actually contribute to the Holocaust?
Criminology, Holocaust, contributed. A huge question for the field's self-reflection.
Fifth, what is genocide? Why did we need that specific term?
What is genocide? Definition needed. Its unique nature.
Sixth, why is there so little agreement on whether specific events are genocides?
Little agreement on genocides. The politics of naming.
And seventh, if states killed more people than individuals in the 20th century, why did criminology mostly ignore state killing?
State biggest killer. Criminology not studied. a devastating critique of the discipline's traditional focus.
And the source concludes from this that traditional criminology has been weak on these massive issues. It highlights the call for much broader, expansionist understandings of harm, moving beyond just legal crime.
Criminology's weakness, expansionist understandings of harm, looking beyond the law books.
Which brings us to the final category, crimes of the state and state agents. Section 10.2.1.
Crimes of the state, state agents, essential category. Examples.
State collusion with corporate and environmental crime. We mentioned that. State power and corruption by state elites. Obvious but important.
State collusion, corporate crime, environmental crime. And state power, corruption, state elites. What else?
Crimes by international peacekeepers or those acting with state authority abroad. The example given is torture at Abu Ghraib.
International peacekeepers, higher power holders, torture at Abu Ghraib. Betrayal of trust.
And domestic police crimes. The example used is Tahrir Square in Egypt.
Domestic police, Tahrir Square, Egyptian police. Power abused at home, too.
All this, the source argues, ties back to that breakdown of nation-state Westphalian order theme. If the state is compromised, so are its agents.
And the result is a loss of faith.
A massive loss of faith in the officials, the institutions, the ones meant to protect.
And crucially, a loss of faith in traditional criminology itself.
Yes, loss of faith in traditional criminology. If it ignored state crime, how relevant is it?
Leading to that provocative question, was traditional criminology just an agent of the state?
Was traditional criminology an agent of the state? A question the field has to ask itself.
Which connects back to that personal question from the course guide, brought up again here. Who are you and why are you doing this subject?
Who are you and why are you doing this subject? Amidst all this complexity, market spread, consumerism, world disorder, instability, violence, where do you stand? What motivates you?
It's a lot to take in. A really challenging conclusion. The source ends by saying, well, the future is what we make it. Individually, collectively.
A sobering reminder, but also empowering. Agency still matters.
Okay, that brings us toward the end of this deep dive, our final look at this course material.
We've covered a lot. The huge challenges, globalization and postmodernism pose to criminology, how certainties are dissolving. We looked at the horror of ongoing genocide through the Rohingya case, using Feuerstein's framework, that idea of genocide as social practice.
We talked about transnational crimes, the role of the internet, and the inescapable reality of state crime, linking it all back to the weakening nation-state and the need for that broader criminological imagination.
And we grappled with Morrison's really tough questions about criminology's history, its relationship with state power, statistics, genocide, and its historical blind spot regarding state violence.
These aren't easy topics. They force us to question everything and demand a much more critical view of crime and harm globally. Please, keep thinking about these ideas.
And maybe hold on to that final question. With state crime and global harms being so vast, how do we build a more just world? And what role can this critical criminological imagination play in that?
A reminder that this discussion was based entirely on the course readings and excerpts for Topic 10 Conclusion, Criminology under Globalization.
And we must thank the University of London again for providing these essential materials for study. They are invaluable.
And, as always, this deep dive was created strictly for educational purposes only.
And we're proud it was brought to you by Sinorbit Academy, Sri Lanka.
Finally, one last time to everyone facing exams. Really, truly good luck. You've wrestled with some incredibly complex ideas.
Trust your understanding. Keep questioning. Keep that criminological imagination alive.
Until the next deep dive.